Infrastructure Manager at New Anglia, leading on all things clean growth. This is our penultimate webinar. We've done 4 already, would you believe, all associated with COP27, helping businesses to understand a little bit more about where to go and what to do. And Andy has very kindly said he's going to come and tell you all about carbon footprinting. And I just ought to have a little caveat in here to say this webinar is being funded by the UK government's Community Renewal Fund. And that's me done. So Andy, over to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Ellen. Thanks. Welcome, everyone. It's nice to see a good turnout as well. So just a bit of background, some of you I've met and know already from previous sessions and other interactions, but Andy Skinner from AMS Business Consultants. We are Lean Six Sigma specialists, and a lot of people who haven't heard of Lean Six Sigma usually go the huh reaction, because what on earth is that? In simple terms, we help businesses understand how their business processes are performing, and we've got a little friend helping, how the business processes are performing, eliminate waste, make them more productive, introduce efficiencies. So that goes hand in hand very, very well with businesses achieving a reduction in their carbon footprint and reducing carbon emissions. So what I want to talk about today is kind of mashing 2 things together. So a little bit from my world around data collection and how do you collect data? Because a lot of people are kind of fearful of that and think, blimey, this is a bit intense. So ultimately, what I want to get to by the end of the session, so by 1 o'clock, is you all go away comfortable and thinking, do you know what? Yeah, I'm going to start measuring my carbon footprint because it's really not that hard. There are things you need to consider. So that's the objective today. I know people are coming and going, but I'll just repeat for fear of repeating myself. Feel free, people, to come off mute. So whilst it's being recorded, it's a bit. I want this to be as interactive. Ask questions, share examples, whatever. Not so worried about your cameras, leave them on or off, whatever you're more comfortable with, but feel free to come off mute. Or if you're not comfortable on mute, coming off mute, or you're in an environment that's quite noisy, pop any questions, etc. in the chat and we will respond to them. I'll respond to them. I'm going to share my screen in a second. This is going to be a little bit trainee session, so apologies for that, but it's kind of the most effective way to share some of this information. I am not going to sit and read through the slides though, and I've got about a slide deck of about 20 slides. I'm probably not even going to go through them all on this session, but Ellen will send them out afterwards, so you've got them as reference material to use in the future. Any questions so far? I was trying to get someone off mute, but they're not biting. Right, cool. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen, guys. If I can have some thumbs up or an acknowledgement when you can see the screen. Ellen, just shout when you can see it, and I'll assume everybody else can. Yes. Perfect. There, thumbs up. Fantastic. Thanks, Bex. So at this point, guys, I can't actually see many of you now because the cameras are on. So you're going to have to make some noise if you want to. So couple of things. So inputs and outputs, really, I think, but when you start thinking about measuring your carbon footprint, if you can get into the mind, and it says him being the process geek, if you can get into the mindset of thinking about your business and your business processes, think about what are the inputs into your business and what are the outputs. And without realizing that, you're probably going to identify quite a few of the measures straight away, which will then help you and inform what goes into the next steps I'm going to talk about in a minute in terms of how do you actually build up a data collection plan and what do you need to think about. So how many of you in your businesses actually have your processes identified or documented? Please, someone come off mute and help me.
Yeah, we do kind of.
I do.
Yeah, I'm not going to criticize. I'm not looking. You don't have to answer any more than that. But yeah, I think what I would say is a starting point as well in terms of understanding carbon footprint. Okay, yes, you want to be able to measure it, and you should be able to measure it, and that can be simple, and for some businesses can be quite complex. Make a start, even if you can't quite do it all. Getting into that discipline and starting to think about it, and that starting point really is starting in understanding your processes. So for example, this is quite a powerful graphic here, but also, you know, some of you will understand scope 1, 2, 3, some of you won't. Don't be too hung up on that. Ultimately, you have a supply chain, which is a lot of your input detail. You have what you do as a service or product, which you can control and influence directly. And then you're going to have downstream activities and output measurements. Think about the measurement of all of those. Hopefully that makes sense. How many of you at the moment measure your carbon footprint?
I do. And I've got my scope emissions as well.
Gold stars for Lorraine. I would hope so as well, Lorraine, given what you've just said.
You'd hope so, wouldn't you?
Sustainability expert, no pressure on Andy. Anybody else? Doesn't matter if you don't. We're not gonna.
The LEP does.
Yeah, I know I do. Yeah, it's not always easy. So gonna move on. Okay, so without getting too hung up on it, there are two different types of data. So some of you that have got a maths and a stats background, this might be familiar with. Some of you won't have you think, oh, blimey, don't worry, we're not going to become a maths lesson. This is just at a high level for now. But essentially, there's two types of data, continuous and discrete. You might also hear it called at some points attribute and non-attribute. And the difference between the two, so attribute data or discrete data has a finite number of outcomes or measures. So I like to call it black and white. So for example, if you were measuring a day of the week, there's only 7. Yeah, well, unless you can create another day somehow, which I think we all wish we could. There's 7 days of the week. If you were measuring a month or a period of a month, there's only 12 months. So I like to refer to the discrete or the non-attribute data as black and white. It's a yes or a no. There's a very finite outcome. Continuous data types are data types where it's infinite. So measurements such as time, as in minutes and seconds measurement, cost, they're ongoing. So they're continuous. Wherever possible in your businesses, try and use continuous data or continuous measures when you start collecting data. So in the world of measuring your carbon footprint, for example, don't measure how many months you're using. This might sound quite basic, some of this, but I apologize, I don't mean it to. If you don't measure what's the how many months you're using power for. Measure the actual unit of measurement. How many units of electricity, of gas, of propane, of whatever it might be, whatever sources you're using, am I using? The reason for that, where we want to use continuous data wherever possible, is when you come to assess performance and look at variation and analyze that data, which we'll come on to in a little bit, so don't worry. You can get a much greater understanding of your process, your performance, your usage using those continual measures, because it will show variation in your performance better. Variation is bad. You don't want a lot of variation for obvious reasons. You want consistent output. However, when you start measuring it, this is going to sound quite strange, variation is good. Because I'm just going to pop a light on because I can see it's getting quite dark, even though you don't want to see me. Variation is good. And the reason it's good is because if you've got a lot of variation, there's a lot of opportunity to make improvements. So without getting too much into that, for example, if let's just use electricity consumption as a case study, let's say on a Monday you're using 10,000 units, that's a lot, or 5,000 units of electricity. On a Tuesday it's 7,000, on a Wednesday it's 10,000, 4,000 on a Thursday, and 3,000 on a Friday. If you were to plot that on a line graph, it's going to go sort of look a little bit like a zigzag pattern. Well, you'd be able to look at why then on a Wednesday does it suddenly peak, for example, and through root cause analysis and investigating what you do, it might be that is a regular pattern, that Wednesdays are the day we use more because we're doing more, potentially. So it might be actually, do you know what, we just didn't, something happens on that day, maybe all the staff are in on that day in the office, so that causes a peak in consumption. doesn't, ultimately the whole point is to have that pattern and that output, so you can then do the investigations to understand why, excuse me, and build that into your decarbonisation plans, your action plans to reduce it wherever possible. So that's why it's really beneficial wherever you can to have continuous data. If anyone gets stuck or would like to ask any questions about this, I will have contact details at the end. From my world, in terms of Lean and Six Sigma, I've 30 years of doing this. People always naturally gravitate to a discrete data type, to a yes, no, and not just in measuring carbon footprints, but in measuring other areas of the business. Most KPIs, for example, focus on percentages. Well, there's only 100%. Despite what people tell you, there some people will say, oh, percentage is continuous, you can go above 100. No, you can't. That's false measurement. But there is always a way that you can convert your measurement to a continuous data type to help you understand more. So all we're going to, I say that's what we're going to get into. You're probably thinking, oh, move on, that's enough, around data types. So think about that before you even think about measurement. So we've got processes and different data types that I want to measure. Okay. Effective steps to building a data collection plan. And again, I'm not going to dwell on this too much, but effectively, if you follow these 4 stages, you won't go far wrong. So establish your data collection goals. In English, what am I going to collect, and why do I want to collect it? That's really the purpose there. What do I want to collect, and why do I want to collect it? And in measuring your carbon footprint, it is more than just your energy consumption. And if you collect the right measures, you not only will you deliver and achieve your net zero ambitions in terms of reduced carbon footprint reduction, you'll find it's going to save your operational costs as well. So it's good business discipline. The two go hand in hand, hence my involvement in the scheme and delivery, and that's the bit where we focus on. Once you know what you want to collect and why, effectively test it. Make sure that everybody can collect it. So, simple example. I'm not going to use traveling to work because most people do that. If I was to ask you to fill in how many hours a week you work, what would your answers be? Roughly, just guess. So how many hours a week do you work?
37.
37.
60.
60. Oh, Bex, that's hard. That's a lot. Okay.
Yeah.
So that was, you guys can contribute or not. That's probably not a good thing to put on an operational definition plan. So what we would say is the start point is between the hours of 9 o'clock and 5 o'clock on a Monday, how many hours do you work? Between the hours of 9 o'clock and 5 o'clock on a Tuesday, how many? I'm making the 9 and 5 up, but you can get the idea by basically identifying to people, where does that measure start and where does that measure stop? So carbon footprint, think about your processes. How much electricity do we use when we start that activity to when we stop that activity? And that activity could be lots of different things and everything in between. The key point here is that when you develop a data collection plan, and some of it might be system-driven data, okay? So things like obviously your metered power, electricity, gas, quite simple, read the meter. In that sense, or if you've got smart meterage, then it's going to be an automated thing. But there, in terms of calculating your carbon footprint, that's just one element, and we'll come on to that later. There's lots more that you should be considering in terms of, okay, measuring it's the one thing, but why are you really measuring your carbon footprint? Hopefully you're measuring it because you want to be able to reduce it and develop an action plan to hopefully achieve as close to net zero as possible by whatever your internal targets are. So clear measures. So what do I want to collect? Why do I want to collect it? How do I collect it? And some of it will be manual. Unfortunately, you don't want to hear that, but that's the real world. Some of it's going to be manual. So so steps 2, 3, and 4 about that manual collection, making sure it's clear. How does someone collect it? If multiple people collect the same data, they get the same results. So if you're asking somebody to measure a particular process, and let's say 4 people may measure it over 4 different weeks, they're measuring it in the same way. And that's exactly what steps 3 and 4 are on here, which we'll whiz through. Does that make sense? Any questions so far? Lorraine, I'm going to pick on you if I may, because you mentioned that you measure your carbon footprint. How do you collect your data?
So I use the bills that come in and the meter readings, so things like water and electricity and gas consumption.
Yeah.
Plus, I also have readings from my solar panels, so I use those as well, because obviously that reduces the amount of energy that I'm using.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a continual or continuous monitoring process.
Yeah. And do you look at the same time periods each month? How do you do that? How do you assess that?
So yeah, it's the same time period each month, and I tend to reassess it. Well, the scope emissions I do annually, but the carbon footprint is really on more on an as and when basis.
Can I ask, Lorraine, are you working from home or are you working from an office?
So my studio is based in my home, yeah.
Because isn't there a standard calculation for people working from home? That's my understanding.
I think that's a question for Andy.
Ish. There are different data models behind residential measurement versus commercial measurement, but again, it comes. But this is kind of why this session really is here, Beck. So, despite you be working from home, the amount of power that you'll be using in business use versus residential use will differ. So without, I'm going to get in the real world. So most people aren't probably going to do this, but you can buy tools, devices that measure by device type. So potentially television or laptop or oven or whatever appliance it is, how much energy they're actually using and consuming. Now, in the real world, I don't know many people that are going to fit those to their fridge to know that my fridge is using So if you're a nerd like me, you will, because in terms of measurement, that's really granular. But ultimately,
so would the fridge be included in, because this is for business, isn't it?
It would be, I would argue personally, God, I'll be careful what I say here. If you're a nerd like me, you measure business use and you measure what you use in the household as well. Because for me, that's really important. It drives my kids crazy, but I say, well, if we don't do this now, your children and your children's children, what's going to happen with them? So yeah, you should separate business and private energy use.
So my team currently all work from home. Well, apart from there's 4 of us sharing my home office, and so we're about to move into office space, but it's serviced office space. So I feel I need to do both calculations. So the same as Lorraine, I need to figure out what my percentage of the home office is of the overall home, or do I just use that standard calculation?
I've got a tool I can share with you, Bex, afterwards if you like, which is free, so I'm not charging all that. So you can have it and use it. I think the real difference between home working and office or premises working is the rate of, so the data models that sit behind it, without getting too techie, the rate of intervention, the cost per unit will influence that, and that's possibly where you're coming from, because most businesses will have a much higher unit cost per energy unit than residential. And that's where all the fun and games we've heard of government around the cost cap and energy cap and so you need both measures. I would urge you, though, you need to know what that pence or pounds, depending on how extreme it is, per unit measurement is. But the most important thing is the amount of units that you're consuming or using.
Okay. And what would you do then? Would you take the overall, divide it by rooms? So if your house has, for argument's sake, 15 rooms, just plucked a number out of the air, and you're in one room, would you divide it all by 15 to get that one room, because you're only functioning out of one room?
One, you've got an awesome house and I want to come and see it if you've got
I just plugged a number right.
There isn't a right and wrong. So again, this is hopefully this in terms of, I feel like I'm a politician not answering the question directly, but in terms of data collection plates, understanding what you want to collect. So do you want to, or do you really need to know from a home working perspective, energy by room? And I mentioned obviously by appliance. I would argue probably not. What's important is, you know, that as a household you're using X number of electricity units, X number of gas units, X number of water units, and you focus on reducing it. That's really the important goal at the end of it, is reducing that consumption.
Well, no, because I need to offset as well. So if I'm doing that for all of my employees who are working from home for their full homes, for all of the gas and electricity that they're using, and other whatever else they're using, and then I calculate that all together as a business, and then I've got to offset against everybody's houses and their children using the bath. And
I've got a tool that I'll share with you afterwards, which is not one of my tools, it's one that I use. It's free to use, which you can give to your staff, and it's a very simplistic way that they can calculate their carbon footprint, which you can coordinate quite easily.
But that's for their full home. That's not for their office.
No, it'll be for the full home. But
yeah, I'm not interested in that. I'm not going to be offsetting the use of their, the children using a hairdryer and them cooking their Sunday roast. That's not work related, then, is it?
But again, that's a really good example, because what you can do is say, do you know what? I'm not, like you said, I'm not interested in the full household consumption, but can you? I want your energy consumption 9 to 5, please, Monday to Friday. So you can give them a data collection plan or measurement. Again, I don't know your business, so it depends how far you want to go and how extreme you want to be. You could say, right, I want to know your meter readings or your electricity. Most of it's going to be electricity, I would imagine. Your unit consumption between 9 to 5, or whatever the working hours are of your staff. Boom.
Yeah, that's not going to work. I mean, for example, if they've got a hot tub, if they're cooking something during the day, got a washing machine on, tumble dryer, these are all high energy uses.
To get to that level of detail, there are very small devices that you can get that attach to the plug sockets, so you will be able to know exactly what energy is being used for the business related tools, and they're not drastically expensive to invest in. Don't know if that answers your question, or how far you invest in them. Okay,
thank you. I think I've taken enough.
It's okay. That's what it's about. It's exactly what this session is about, Bex, because sometimes, like you just mentioned there, you've got complexities in terms of lots of office staff. And I have a this is my personal view on this. Everyone says, a lot of clients I work with is one of their steps to reduce their carbon footprint is have a lot more home working. Does it really reduce the carbon footprint for the business?
I think there is, from my reading and research, a lot of it depends on how many rooms of the house they're heating and how far away from the premises that they live. So if they're travelling more than 6 miles, I think was the cut-off point that I'd heard, I could be wrong, then actually, if it's more than six miles, stay at home. If it's less than 6, come in.
I think it will vary business by business.
Yeah, so many different factors.
Because I know that the LEP and the Growth Hub have changed, and this is part of their ways of working as well, which is great. I don't think there's a right and wrong calculation. Ultimately, it will be different for every business depending on what you do and the nature of the business in the industry. But there will be certainly common variables, so distance travel, what you do, that will influence that. My personal view, if I had 10 members of staff and I had an office base and I was asking them all to work from home, exactly that, Bex, depending on their location in terms of distance from the office, I'm going to save on vehicle emissions without a shadow of a doubt, because people aren't traveling. I would argue even 6 miles, when you see some of the nastiness that comes out, I nearly swore then, nastiness that comes out of diesel petrol vehicles. It is ultimately the highest pollution and carbon emissions. So even 2 miles, I would argue, is a worthwhile saving in that sense. Does it save on other pollutants or emission factors? Probably not, because rather than have one office base using 10 staff, which will be more efficient and effective from an energy perspective than 10 households. So it's about, again, this is where for me it's really important to have this type of data collection plan, measure it and say, do you know what, actually us working from home is worse than us all traveling to work, potentially, or knowing that information so you can make an informed decision. So that's exactly what, you know, what this session is about. Jackie's asked, would you be traveling, would you be calculating travel? Yes, absolutely, Jackie, you'd calculate travel. The tool, I'm happy to share it with you all individually, but I don't want to go through it here because it's another company's tool, so I don't really want to promote them, but it covers, I'm going to jump on the one of the final slides I've got on here. It covers all of the variables that it captures, which includes travel, fuel consumption. For some businesses, if you're doing international travel, flight, any bus, rail, all of it is all part of that calculation. So I'm going to skip on, otherwise we'll end up, there's no way I'm going to get through. So a couple of these I'm going to rattle through very quickly because, as I say, the slides will be sent out. So I don't want to kind of be a broken record, but the first stage there, be really clear what you need to collect. And Bex, you've given some great insight there and great conversation to, you know, what do I need to collect? Do I need to collect it by people's individual addresses? Do I, like you said, you don't want to know about their hot tubs and their 15 rooms in the mansions and whatever they do. You're worried about what they use for business purposes. So again, having a really specific focused data collection plan will help with that. You know, it's a really good, and that is a really good example of having a good operational definition. If you said to me, Andy, can you measure your electricity, please, between Monday to Friday when you're working? Boom. Well, I'll measure it, but you're going to get everything, warts and all. Whereas actually what you probably want to say is, can you measure your laptop usage and charging Monday to Friday as a simplistic example? In production, we need a lot of people to be on site anyway. We'll need to find reduction in different, absolutely. Irina, if I pronounce that correctly, I apologize. Your challenges are probably going to be different, and where you can really benefit in a production environment, and I've got several clients where we're doing this, is around those productivity gains. So I've got Ellen, I'm going to share my favorite example. So I recently did some work, and this was one of the clients that we supported through the Growth Hub, through the LEP, through this program. And I'm going to stop sharing so people can see me, and then we can come back to this. They are a company that basically print cups and bottles. So I'm not a marketing company, they're a manufacturing, a processing business. When I started, so the interaction with them from the LEP was, can you help us do some analysis, please, on the benefit, both commercially and in terms of carbon reduction that solar panels would provide? Great, they're making steps forward. When I get on site, they have 4 huge electrical powered kilns which cure the ink to the cups. So me doing what I do in the process that we follow, how many cups do you cure each day? We don't know. So we build a data collection plan with a client and measure it. I've only got an hour, so I'll go in all day. They had 4 electrical powered kilns. You can kind of guess the level of energy consumption that these monsters, they burn at like 3,000 degrees, so really high energy consumption. They only needed 1. So by being focused on their production process, increasing productivity and efficiencies, that's how they're reducing their carbon footprint, by getting more done, more there. So they've switched 2 off entirely. So they still have the second there. The other thing that was really quite alarming for that business, well, in a positive way, is they were quite proud that they don't recycle, in their words, any cups. So, and I kind of, what do you mean you don't recycle any cups? Wow, there's quite a high error rate when we print these cups, Andy. On average, 1 cup goes through the kiln 11 times. So, you know, I don't necessarily realize if they understood, especially telling somebody like me who's a process geek, what they were saying, how powerful that was. So we've reduced that. So the cups go through the kilns once, right, first time. So ultimately, if you think it's going through 11 times, they're actually wasting 10 times worth of processing of that product. And this wasn't a particularly poor performing business, by the way. Actually, it was quite the opposite. They'd grown so large that they had contracts from clients where they weren't as focused on the specific level of production detail that some of the smaller businesses locally would be. So Irina, to answer that question, in terms of focusing on the processes and productivity, and there will always be something, and a continuous improvement mindset, whether that continuous improvement objective is for staff is sold around doing something better, efficiencies, productivity, or a focus on reduction of carbon footprint. The two are pretty much the same thing, just how, without being too, it's how you're going to badge it and sell it to staff. But actually that continuous improvement program and investment in that and elimination of waste is how you will get the biggest gain in terms of carbon footprint reductions. And you may have solutions where you can redistribute heat from machines or production areas around the office space. There's lots. I would say, are you based in Norfolk or Suffolk?
Hi, in Norfolk. I'm in King's Lynn, and we are in ceramics high pressure casting. So at the moment we're already implementing lean, and we're trying to review our processes. And now we start to think how to actually start to measure our consumption. And it's at the early stage, but it's our plan for next year. And that's why I'm thinking how to start measure this. Is it going to be like, I believe Lorraine mentioned few main parameters that we'll start measure at the beginning, and then it's going to be like cascading, so start to dive in details. And that's why I appreciate any tips or templates if you could share.
Yeah. I think in terms of what I said at the outset, Irina, in terms of define the processes first, and I mean this in the nicest way, document the processes that staff are actually doing, not what the management team think they should be doing.
Yeah, it's always like this. Yeah.
Thought we had to be saying that, but that's the reality, and that's not a negative thing at all. Document the processes, or when I say document, it could be observations. I'm not necessarily talking, written down, but that would help. What are they actually doing, and build your data collection plan around that process. So, for example, step one of that process, how long does that take? Who's doing it? And you'll see, let's say you measure 10 different people doing step one 100 times. Bearing in mind what I said about you'll see that variation, and it could be there's a particular step in the process where you can get a reduction or a more consistent output, which will benefit your carbon footprint. Okay. As a high level example, because it's without looking into the business. The reason I asked where you were, I was going to say, because if you're in Suffolk, there's still consultancy available. Get on it and use it. But I think Norfolk is all gone. Ellen, you're going to correct me on that if I'm wrong.
Okay, but anyway, thank you so much for your help. Thank you.
But again, we can have a follow-up call and talk through some wider examples and things that you can and can't do. So just go back to sharing the screens. I'm not going to get through all of these. I'm going to whiz through them. So make sure you're clear on what it is. Segmentation is something that you should be considering. In English, what do I mean by segmentation? Hopefully, anyway, one of the main reasons you're measuring your carbon footprint, one, to know what it is, but two, to be able to do something about it and reduce it. And to be able to do something about it, you want to know what is causing peaks, troughs in your carbon emissions. And that's what we mean by segmentation factors. So what variables are causing higher, lower emission rates? So as an example, typical things that these slides I say are taken from a different module, but in a non-carbon footprint measurement scenario, product, customer, market, so you can days of the week, some of those are discrete measures, so be careful. In reality, and I say this, and I just said obviously these are taken from a non-carbon footprint training course that I deliver, which is called Greenbelt. These all apply still, because actually what you should be measuring are your processes which actually cause your carbon emissions and your waste. So why wouldn't you? So these segmentation factors will be very applicable. And when you wouldn't necessarily just geography, for example, that you could have a distribution or a supply chain element to the business. You could be delivering products or services by vehicles, where you can measure the mileage and distance traveled. All of those type of things are going to influence that. In all of the consultations that I've done so far with the Growth Hub and the LEP, every single business has had a fleet element to their business without realizing it. And some of the largest businesses locally that I've supported have had 10 to 20 vehicles to support the business needs. Very few of them had actually been measuring driver performance or a metric called cost per mile, which is so easy to calculate and so informative in terms of carbon footprint reduction. The reality is now most commercial vehicles have a tracker solution of some description fitted to them. The data that is available from that tracker is actually quite scary. So vehicle trackers will be able to tell you their average mile per gallon consumption, how quickly the driver's accelerating from 0 to 30 mile an hour, how heavy they're braking, so how quickly they're stopping, all sorts. So there's a wealth of data there, which, there are so many easy things you can do to reduce carbon, your emissions with better driver performance. And also one particular client that I worked with just 2 weeks ago had 12 vehicles. They only needed 8. So by actually having that data available, they're able to take 4 vehicles or idleize 4 vehicles, which is a huge saving, both financially, but obviously from a waste perspective as well for them. Can't speak. Operational definitions I've done to death, so I'm going to skip past this. The slides will be sent out. Don't worry. Cool. So I mentioned earlier about typical the tool that I'm happy to share, etc. Typically, when you're calculating your carbon footprint, these are the segmentation factors. These are the measures that you're going to need to know as a bare minimum to be able to calculate your carbon footprints relatively accurately for the business. Most of the clients I've seen either can't calculate their carbon or think they can't calculate their carbon footprint. Let me correct myself there. Or they don't want to do it unless they can be 100% accurate. Now, being a data person saying this, I can't believe I'm about to say this. Nonsense. Calculate what you can. And as long as you start measuring, that's a step forward. It would be my out. But yes, you want to be able to measure accurately and robustly. But if you don't start the measurement somewhere, you're never going to start. It's too easy to say, oh, we don't pay for our electricity as part of our rent. Nonsense. You will be able to ask your landlord, the owner of the building, for that detail, those metrics. And if you can't measure what you can measure and make some assumptions and then validate those assumptions at a later point, there, in my opinion, and I can see Ellen nodding, there is no excuse, and I'm going to say this, and this might be slightly controversial. I actually personally would like to see the government introduce some form of levy or tax or penal consequence for businesses that aren't measuring their carbon emissions, because until that happens, in reality, not everyone's going to do it. Not that I really want to pay more tax myself or any emissions, but that's the reality is, in all honesty, and I know we've got people in this session that are sustainability experts and people that are, that there are not enough people really committed to reducing their carbon footprint. They give it lip service, or they do it for other reasons, maybe to reduce operational costs. They're not doing it for the hearts and minds reasons, which we should all be doing it for, in terms of genuinely reducing. For some businesses, reducing their carbon emissions is going to mean significant investment. So what? That's the right thing to be doing, in my opinion. And I say that because it's not my business. I haven't got raise that capital for the investment. But that is the reality of it, and that's significantly important. So on that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. If I can get back out of here somehow. There we go. Any questions? Anything that jumps out? The slides will be sent out. I'm conscious I don't want to rattle through them, and I'd much rather discuss and answer any questions with people that are here now. Come off mute. Speak. Was that useful? I'm going to take silence as yes.
It was, yes. Thank you very
Thank you.
much. I was going to say one of the things that we find very difficult within the cultural heritage sector is carbon footprinting the materials that we use. Having gone to sessions alongside building specialists, so architects, they have a whole methodology on how to measure the carbon footprint of the whole life of a building. That tool does not exist in the cultural heritage sector. And even if it did, we don't have the data to know what a square metre of the carbon footprint of a square metre of Tyvek is. So this is getting down to the granular level now. Yes, we can do the meta, we can do our energy consumption, we can do our water consumption, we can do a carbon footprint as you would do for a business. But our real stumbling block is the individual materials and products that we use. Not asking you to come up with an answer to that. Maybe there is something out there that can be used.
I've not seen anything, to be brutally honest. I've seen businesses build their own models internally. And again, just to balance it, because I think it's drastically important. And building data collection plans is a huge part of the methodology that I work with clients to deliver, both for carbon footprint reasons and non-carbon footprint projects. There is a way to do it. I think the reality is some of this data, to get to that level of data, takes some time. The granularity and quality of data to be used. I mean, some of the current models that are commonly known and some of the government models, they've taken 20 years. They're not overnight.
And that's my frustration, because we don't have 20 years.
No,
we have 7.
So the resources required to collect that data can be a challenge. But we've got to start somewhere. It's got to start happening. I don't know that I haven't got the answer to it, I'm afraid, Lorraine, if you wanted one.
We do have those learned academic institutions carrying out research projects, but it is that time factor. By the time that data comes out, we'll be at 4 degrees centigrade of heating and it will be too late.
Yeah, there are some, and there's some local businesses actually that have done some analysis in whether they would be happy to share their findings or not. Chloe, I don't know, do you know Chloe Yellen? Chloe Donovan? You must know Chloe. She may have some of that information and insight that's available, Lorraine. Happy to make an introduction. I don't know if she will or won't, but happy to make an introduction to Chloe. So Chloe, I've forgotten the name of her business, which is really bad of me, but she makes
natural building systems.
Oh, there you go. Thanks, Ellen. That's my get out.
Right.
She makes sustainable building materials. Which
so this is not building materials, because we can do that. That data exists. So this is for what conservators, people, curators, exhibition technicians are actually using. So materials like Tyvek and felt and blotting paper and mount board and perspex we could probably get, smoke sponges, all of the bits and pieces we use. And as I say, I'm not expecting you to come up with an answer. Yeah. I think it's maybe somebody does have look, there's this tool that I've never heard of, you've never heard of. It's the sharing of the information that's really important, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Most of the solutions, tools that I've used and clients have used, that we've built ourselves with their data and data models, and then used existing models to overlap. There isn't an off the shelf or something that I'm aware of anyway.
I just wanted to comment, if you don't mind, and then Lorraine, some company, they approach me as well with regards to this data collection, and some of them definitely it will be our data, but the remaining one, they told that there are applications that they collect in average industry, and they have this database, and to take this like on board at this point at the beginning when we don't have our precise data. I don't know, Andy, and what do you think? Is it solution? Should we like calculate this way, or is better to start ourselves and just to grow this kind of?
I don't know how they would have data on your business if they've not spent time with you or maybe I misunderstood the question. So they would provide data for you to calculate your carbon footprint, the models and the calculations, is that?
So we're collecting data that we can give them using some kind of application, and they think, okay, if we have any gaps in data collection, they will trying to find industry which will be pretty much close to us, and then we will use that average data as our like assumption at this point. I don't know if it's the right way to do. It was just the introduction, but
I won't right or wrong because I don't know that. But insert, you know, what I've kind of said it really. Making some measurement and taking the step forward is the most important first step. So doing that will give you, you know, yes, you'll have it. I would say go for it. Again, without every business is going to be different, and you know, you may have some overlap in terms of industry sectors as well. You know, whether that's but start essentially is the core. I'm trying to sit on the fence and not offend anyone or start measuring, and if you know what your processes are, you'll be able to talk to those suppliers or internally and say, actually, this is where we should be focusing.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for today's session. Thank you.
I suspect you'll have different elements to the business arena, looking at your background in terms of you'll have a production element. I'm assuming you have a supply chain element as well.
Yeah.
Products, and I would also imagine you have a distribution element as well. You know, whether you distribute nationally, internationally, is all going to have an influence on.
Yeah, and we just realized that all this end of life, we shipping our big machinery all over the world, and since we don't have like proper recycling and other system, and it's going to fall in our end of cycle. So yeah, it will be not easy, but yeah, thank you.
Yeah, perfect. Excellent. Any other questions? Some people have left, some are staying. Who's going to start collecting data now for their? Yes, Joy, you'll get a copy. Boom, boom, boom. Who's going to start? Hopefully, everyone's going to put a thumbs up now. Who feels comfortable and not scared that they can start collecting information data around their carbon footprint? And I would encourage you, and I'd say, don't worry if it looks bad. Worry a little bit, but
at least you know, Andy, if it looks bad, at least you know it's bad. And you probably already know it's bad.
Yeah, that typically tends to be the issue that I see the most, is people know that their carbon footprint is bad, so they don't want to measure it, or they've got a feeling as well. No, knowing what the output is, so you can develop an action plan and focus on that, is far more valuable than just burying your head in the sand, because it's going to come at some point anyway. So and we need people to be doing it proactively. So lots of thumbs up there. Boom, boom, boom. Any other questions? I can't fill for 10 minutes. So we must have some questions, please. Being brutally honest.
We can always finish, Andy, if we're there and people can. Oh, Bex has put her camera back on.
Yeah, sorry, I had to. One of my team has an inquiry. Want to speak to me. I don't know if you've covered it. I do apologise if you have, but offsetting. So if you've spoken about offsetting, I'm sorry if I've missed it. Are there any? I don't. You know, with the whole greenwashing, and we've just got to be very careful that we actually invest in something that is worthwhile. Are there any local schemes that you know of?
I know of businesses that support with offsetting locally, yes. The ones that I know of, though, to make them viable, they need to have quite a scale and volume. Ellen's probably, I'm not Ellen had probably got more knowledge in terms of offsetting and supply than I have on that one. Bex, sorry.
One
Ellen.
of our other, no, you're fine. One of our other webinars, I will remind myself which one, Bex, did mention offsetting and the importance of accreditation, and they were saying how there's only 3 accreditation schemes in the UK. So if if I remind myself what those 3 schemes are, I will ping you the details of those specifically.
Okay.
So then,
Well, if there are only 3, I can probably just find them on Google. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think they've probably got a number of projects, but there are 3 accredited schemes, according to, I think, the Carbon Trust. I think it was somebody reputable. I can't remember who. I think it was the Carbon Trust.
Well, on the
Lovely.
tool that I mentioned, Bex, which I'm happy to share, I'll share if you guys want it. My contact details and others are on the slide deck. Get in touch. There's a lot of detail around offsetting in that. So essentially, you can calculate your own carbon footprint, and then there's a report that's produced for you, and that details various offsetting organisations and measures as well. There's detail in there. Without pulling one up and reading it, I couldn't remember because it's not my focus on. So yeah.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Joy, yes, perfect. I think we've covered any questions that we haven't covered that are in the chat. I think we've covered most of them looking at that, which is good. But yeah, key message, guys, really don't be afraid to start measuring. Just know what you want to measure and know what you want to do with it, in terms of calculate that measure, develop an action plan, and start measuring it regularly. And the regularity will vary by business. I'm not saying do it every day. Blimey, that would be overkill. But weekly, potentially monthly, quarterly, the frequency, as I say, will vary depending on your business and the relevance for it. Do something, and hopefully you'll see it going down because you're taking the right steps to decrease it. So I'm interested, Bex. I feel like I'm kind of picking on you, so I don't. Do you know whether people working at home in your business is more efficient or less carbon waste is generated versus actually being around in an office space?
No.
That's very honest of you.
Not yet. But ask me again in a month, and I'm hoping to know the answer.
Oh, good. That's really good. Ellen, do you know for the LEP and the growth hub, or is that probably?
I think when we calculated our carbon footprint, I think we saw a significant decline in our carbon footprint because of COVID, because we were all working from home, because we were all based across Norfolk and Suffolk. So commuting was phenomenal. I mean, for our new business mileage would probably be our biggest element of our footprint. But when we put the commuting in, it was at least double what we were commuting daily compared to our business mileage. And it's not something I had thought about. So yeah, until we measured it.
Yeah, I think that kind of links back to what you were saying, Bex, around, you might have read. I'm always cautious of, I mean, the reports and the insight that are shared, whether from government or various bodies, are useful and informative, but I'm always nervous taking a blanket, unless you travel 6 miles, you're not what you're traveling 6 miles in, that kind of, so don't, there is useful insight for sure. But measure it where you can is probably a better answer, to be honest with you, and know what that means to you and assess it. There we go. I managed to fill for nearly 10 minutes. Blimey. Cool. There's one more session, Ellen? Do you want to?
Yeah, there's one session on Friday focusing on ESG and supply chain. So yeah, a very big task, but these often are. Yeah, if you want to join, feel free to share up on our Eventbrite. All the other content, including this, will be up on the website probably early next week, and we will follow up with presentational material as appropriate.
Yeah, and for those people that are based in Suffolk, I don't know where you're all based, sorry, there is still some consultancy left, but you need to be quick because it ends soon anyway, I think, Ellen, doesn't it?
I think we need, yeah, I think we've got 2 weeks.
Yeah, so if you do want some help, not from me, guys, there's a panel of 6 or 7 people that are all available. Yeah. Depending on what your business type, industry sector and needs are, but you need to be quick because it will go soon because of time frames. There you go. There's my promotional bit done, Ellen, as well. Look, there we go.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you very much, Andy. Much appreciated. Lots of interesting stuff there in terms of carbon footprinting. Yeah, I suppose from my point of view, just give it a go. You know, I'm a relative novice in this kind of thing, and I think measure something, even if you can't measure all of it, because ours was not perfect, but it just gives you a bit of a clue where to focus. And yeah, if it can't be perfect, assumptions are good, because I think your best assumptions, your estimates, are probably enough on point to get it right.
Yeah, just to finalize, as long as you're measuring the same way every time,
Absolutely.
you're going to know that you're making a difference. There you go. So your measurement might not be perfect, but as long as your measurement's consistent, you're going to know that you're making a difference. There we go.
Perfect. All right. Thank you very much, Andy. Much appreciated. And thank you guys for joining us today.
Thank you.
very much. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Cool. Thanks.